Welcome to this explainer of Mark Bates's incredible theological synthesis on why human life holds absolute, sacred value. Today, we're taking a really deep dive into a foundational question, one that literally shapes our entire moral landscape. We're going to look at how ancient texts and rigorous theological frameworks completely reframe how we view human dignity. The core idea here? Separating a person's worth entirely from what they can actually do and anchoring it instead in an unbreakable divine decree. It's a fascinating perspective, so let's get into it.
Okay, so here's our roadmap for today. We're going to cover 1. The crisis of human worth. 2. Ascribed status versus capacity. 3. The 5 pillars of sacredness. 4. The unfolding promise plan. And finally, 5. Modern bioethics and vulnerability.
Starting off with Section 1, the crisis of human worth. Right now, in our modern era, there's this massive tension at the heart of our ethics. Ask yourself, how do we actually measure human worth? Are we valued simply by our cognitive faculties and our economic output? Or is there some absolute divine endowment that makes every single person inherently precious? This isn't just some abstract philosophical puzzle for academics to debate. The way a society answers this specific question directly dictates how it treats its most vulnerable members. The source points out that secular ethicists often argue that without a theological foundation, human value basically degrades into a utilitarian calculation. It becomes all about your exercisable capacities. Take the philosopher Peter Singer, for example. He famously asserts that simply being a biological member of the human species doesn't actually grant you intrinsic value. Think about what that means. According to that framework, if your worth is tied solely to what you can physically or cognitively achieve, then anyone lacking those capacities, like the unborn, the elderly, or those with severe disabilities, is placed in a highly precarious, devalued position. Let's move on to Section 2, Ascribed Status versus Capacity. Now, there is a super sharp contrast here that the source outlines. We're talking about worth granted by a creator's grace versus worth earned by merit or utility. In the theological view, human worth is what's called an ascribed status. It's handed down. It's stamped upon us by a sovereign divine decree, and it is completely independent of your utility, your health, your social standing, or your developmental stage. You don't earn it, and you can't lose it. Bates also makes a really crucial clarification here between two words we often mix up: sacredness and sanctity. Sacredness is an objective stamp placed upon us. Sanctity, on the other hand, is an achieved state of moral or religious purity. So you might fail morally, meaning you might lose your sanctity, but your sacredness, that is an indestructible identity at the very core of your being. It's literally what you inherently are by virtue of divine creation. And this idea actually ties back to an incredible ancient concept. In the ancient Near East, a Tselem, which is the Hebrew word for image, was a literal physical statue set up in a temple to represent a god's presence. Well, Genesis totally subverts this. It declares that no carved stone is needed because human beings, male and female equally, are the living, breathing statues of the divine in the cosmic temple of creation. It's like we are the authorized representatives on earth. Mind-blowing, right? All right, Section 3, the 5 pillars of sacredness. Building on that Genesis foundation, the source outlines 5 Christological pillars. These essentially take that ancient creation theology and translate it into a historical reality through the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus. Let's break down exactly how these 5 pillars hallow human existence. Starting with the first 2, his inclusive ministry and the Incarnation. Through his ministry, Jesus systematically proved that all are valuable. He completely dismantled the cultural hierarchies of his day by touching the sick and eating with outcasts. Furthermore, by actually taking on a physical human body in the Incarnation, God strikes a decisive blow against any philosophy that views the physical body as just some disposable shell. Physical, skin, bones, and organs matter profoundly in this framework. Then we hit the third pillar, the cross. In this theology, the cross completely equalizes all humanity. Why? Because it pays an ultimate price for everyone. It acts as an absolute barrier against viewing anyone as disposable. If the Creator was willing to pay an infinite price for every single human being, even enemies, then absolutely no one can be written off as collateral damage or worthless. We are all completely leveled by this universal price tag. Next up, the physical resurrection, and what theologians call image Christology. The physical resurrection proves that God is ultimately for life. Jesus didn't rise as a floaty, disembodied spirit. He rose in a physical, touchable body. And, as the theologian Dietrich Bonhoeffer emphasizes,
Christ, being the perfect image, restores the dignity of bearing that divine image to a broken humanity. He restores what was distorted.
This brings us to Section 4, the unfolding promise plan. The theologian Walter C. Kaiser Jr. maps this all out using something he calls a promise plan. He shows how this isn't just an isolated proof text or a modern political invention. Instead, it's a single, unfolding redemptive strategy across time, from the creation era right through to the first-century Messiah, that consistently prioritizes the protection of human life. It's the central blueprint woven throughout the texts. For instance, because humanity bears the image of God, taking an innocent life incurs an ultimate reckoning. We see this right after the flood in Genesis 9, where shedding human blood is treated directly as an assault on God's own image. And this idea flows straight into the Sinai Holiness Code, which strictly mandated protective laws for the poor, the deaf, and the blind. Protecting the vulnerable becomes the absolute truest measure of divine loyalty. Which leads us to our final part, Section 5, Modern Bioethics and Vulnerability. The source reports on a really stark contrast when we apply this dense theology to modern medicine. While secular autonomy often frames euthanasia or physician-assisted suicide as compassion, the Sacredness framework views it as a violation. From this theological lens, true compassion isn't eliminating the sufferer to prevent the suffering. Instead, it's pushing back against societal abandonment with radical, unbroken human presence and cost-bearing hospice care. It's about treating the patient's life as inherently valuable, regardless of their physical decline. But on the flip side, the text also offers a firm critique of something called vitalism. Vitalism is the fear-driven attempt to preserve physical life indefinitely at any cost. The theological counterargument here is that because Christ conquered death, believers can peacefully accept mortality without idolatrously prolonging the active dying process. So, when a terminal condition is taking its natural course, stepping back from futile, invasive machinery isn't a violation of life's sacredness. It's a peaceful surrender, resting in the hands of the Redeemer. Now, Bates also addresses a critically difficult tension. What about the perpetrators of horrific crimes? Well, the synthesis explains that even those individuals retain their unerasable identity as image bearers. Their actions might represent a monstrous desecration, meaning justice and societal restraint are absolutely 100% necessary. But their core ontological identity as a creation of God is indestructible. Therefore, judicial penalties have to be carried out without reducing the offender to exterminable vermin. So, what does this all mean for us at the end of the day? If worth is truly an indestructible gift, an ascribed divine decree, rather than just some fragile capacity, how must that fundamentally reshape our community's response to the weak, the sick, and the marginalized? If every single person you lock eyes with is a living, consecrated representative of the Creator, independent of their utility or output, it demands a total transformation in our ethics and our daily compassion. Seriously, if every life is sacred by design, how will that change the way you look at the next person you meet? Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer. I hope it gave you a lot to think about.